In the hallowed halls of justice, a sacred trust is shattered when the accused unleashes fury on the very person tasked with dispensing justice. Welcome to a world of raw emotion, where civility is abandoned and chaos reigns supreme. Convicts attacking the judge in court is the shocking reality that unfolds when the accused, fueled by rage and defiance, turns on the symbol of justice. Join us on a journey into the heart of courtroom mayhem, where the boundaries of decorum are pushed to the limit. As we explore the most astonishing cases, we'll uncover the answers to the question, what drives a person to attack the very embodiment of justice? Let's dive in. Debra Ren. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Debra Ren, a 25-year-old with a troubled past, stood before Judge Mary K. Huss. His eyes betrayed a mix of fear and resignation as he awaited his fate, knowing well the gravity of his actions. He had wielded a baseball bat in a fit of rage, leaving another man battered and bruised. With the weight of his guilt heavy upon him, he pleaded guilty, bracing himself for the impending sentence of 1 to 4 years behind bars. But as the proceedings unfolded, what struck observers was not Ren's defiance, but his calmness. In a matter-of-fact exchange with Judge Huss, he attempted to plead his case, citing his troubled past and the strides he had made toward redemption. Ren commented that, given his past, he believed a second stint in prison was unjustified. He maintained a steady voice, despite the seriousness of the situation. Judge Huss, however, was unmoved, reciting Ren's litany of past transgressions: 3 felonies, 9 misdemeanors, and a trial of broken laws. Yet, Ren persisted, his words tinged with desperation as he tried to convince the judge of his newfound commitment to rehabilitation. But then, in a shocking turn of events, the courtroom became chaotic. Without warning, Ren leaped over the bench with fury as he charged towards Judge Huss. Deputies scrambled to intervene, wrestling him to the ground as panic rippled through the room. Amidst the chaos, alarms blared and calls for medical assistance echoed off the walls. Judge Huss, her calm demeanor shattered, lay wounded, blood pooling from a gaping laceration on her head. As the chaos unfolded, it became clear that Ren's outburst had left a trail of destruction in its wake. Days later, Ren returned to court, a shadow of his former self, shackled and subdued. However, the judge's voice was firm and decisive as she announced his sentence. In accordance with the law, Ren was sentenced to 19 to 48 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections, a harsh reality that loomed large before him. Melissa Hardwick. Do you know the saying about how whatever a woman can do, a man can do better? Well, maybe that's exactly what happened with Melissa Hardwick. Melissa found herself at the center of a heated domestic violence hearing in Russell and Wayne County Family Court in Kentucky. During the hearing overseen by Judge Jennifer Edwards for a domestic violence complaint filed by her ex-husband, Melissa was eager to share her side of the story. As she took the stand, her ex-husband's words painted a picture of a stormy relationship that had been spiraling out of control since the start of the year. He spoke of incidents and arrests, of harassment and fear. But just as it seemed like he was about to reveal the most intimate details of her personal life, Melissa's composure suddenly shattered. "This is none of your business," she erupted, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "My personal life is none of your concern." The judge cautioned that if there were further disruptions, Melissa would face contempt of court charges. However, Melissa remained defiant, stating that she didn't care and insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong to her ex-husband. The judge acknowledged her statement, conceding that regardless, she would serve a 10-day jail sentence for contempt. But that was when things only got more chaotic from there. Melissa suddenly lunged at the judge, but fortunately, the court deputies were able to restrain her just in time. Despite being restrained, she continued to hurl verbal threats, leading to additional criminal charges. It was a moment that left everyone in the courtroom breathless and wondering what secrets Melissa was hiding, what pain she was trying to keep inside. Melissa was charged with 3 criminal counts: terroristic threatening in the 3rd degree, intimidating a participant in the legal process, and resisting arrest. As a result, Melissa was sentenced to 120 days in prison for her outburst. Her bond was set at $25,000. Furthermore, Judge Edwards ruled that the domestic violence order filed by her husband would remain in place following the incident in the courtroom. This incident raises questions about how her behavior compares to other cases, such as the incident involving 30-year-old Bass Webb who spat on a judge. Brian Nichols. March 11, 2005, was a day that would go down in infamy at the Fulton County Courthouse. It was a typical morning at the Fulton County Justice Tower until Brian brutally attacked Deputy Cynthia Hall at 5:54 a.m. Deputy Cynthia Hall was escorting Brian from the basement detention area to a holding cell on the 8th floor, a routine task that would soon turn deadly. Tragically, Hall made a critical error. She failed to require Brian to wear leg shackles, despite the fact that he had been caught with door hinges hidden in his shoes just the day before. This oversight would prove to be a fatal mistake, as Brian was able to use his unrestrained freedom to launch an attack on Hall and begin his rampage. In a sudden and violent outburst, Brian overpowered Deputy Cynthia Hall, wrenching her gun belt from her waist and slamming her into a nearby cell. He locked the door behind her, trapping her inside. With Cynthia neutralized, Brian stormed and aimed at Judge Roland W. Barnes's private chambers, his gun waving wildly as he took aim at the terrified occupants. Case managers Susan Christie and Gina Clark Thomas cowered in fear, alongside attorney David Allman, as Brian barked demands to reveal the whereabouts of Judge Barnes. Just then, Sergeant Grantley White, the court bailiff, burst into the room, only to be met with the cold steel of Brian's gun trained squarely on him. The situation quickly escalated, leaving the staff in the chambers at the mercy of Brian, who was now armed and dangerous. Brian burst into courtroom 8F through a door behind the judge's bench, his gun drawn and ready. Judge Barnes, presiding over a civil trial, never stood a chance. Brian fired a single shot at close range, striking the judge in the back of the head and killing him instantly. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the courtroom as Brian scanned the prosecution table, his eyes searching for his targets. Realizing the assistant district attorneys he sought were absent, he turned his attention to Julie Brando, the court reporter, and shot her in the head. Sergeant White, who had been forced into the bathroom, sprang into action, grabbing his radio to send out a desperate Mayday call. "Shots fired!" he yelled into the radio, his voice steady despite the chaos. Brian, meanwhile, stormed out of the courtroom, his gun still smoking. He raced into a side room, searching for his ex-girlfriend, whom he took advantage of, but she was nowhere to be found. Brian then burst out of the emergency stairwell. The door alarm blared like a siren, alerting everyone in the vicinity. As Brian fled the courthouse, he fired his gun into the air, sending pedestrians on Martin Luther King Drive scrambling for cover like ants from a disturbed nest. The chaos was palpable as people ran for their lives, seeking refuge from the hail of bullets. Brian then hijacked a vehicle, commandeering the driver's seat and speeding away from the scene. A massive manhunt ensued, with law enforcement agencies working tirelessly to track down the fugitive. Finally, a tip-off led police to Brian's hideout, and he was apprehended, his reign of terror brought to an abrupt end. Back in court, Brian faced the full wrath of justice, his crimes laid bare for all to see. With the eyes of the nation upon him, Brian's lawyers gambled on an unorthodox defense. Brian's defense team argued that their client was insane and shouldn't be held accountable for his actions. They pointed to his history of depression and suicidal thoughts after a rough breakup with his girlfriend. Psychology experts took the stand, revealing Brian's disturbing beliefs, including his conviction that white people were out to eradicate the black race. The jury was left to ponder. Was Brian a victim of his twisted mind, or a master manipulator? Several judges withdrew themselves from the case due to their friendship with the murdered judge, Roland Barnes. Judge Hilton Fuller took over, but later disqualified himself due to concerns about judicial impartiality. The case was then handed over to Superior Court Judge James Bodiford. Brian attempted to escape by allegedly plotting another escape attempt. An investigation revealed that Brian had received help from his girlfriend, 2 deputies, a paralegal, and his brother. The trial commenced in Atlanta Municipal Court, where Brian entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, setting the stage for a complex and riveting legal battle. His defense team posited that he was under the delusion of being at war with the government, but the prosecution countered with compelling evidence suggesting Brian was fully cognizant of his actions and had meticulously planned the attack. Building on this foundation, the prosecution sought to dismantle the defense's insanity plea, presenting a wealth of evidence that Brian was in full control of his faculties. Gail Abramson, a former prosecutor, testified that she observed no indications of mental illness during Brian's 2005 trials, a crucial point that bolstered the prosecution's case. Over 17 days, the prosecution presented a robust case, calling 76 witnesses and displaying graphic autopsy photos of Brian's 4 victims, further solidifying their argument. In a strategic countermove, the defense cited a traumatic childhood and a devastating breakup with his girlfriend that precipitated a downward spiral. To substantiate their claim, they called upon Brian's former girlfriend and a psychiatrist to testify about his mental state. The former girlfriend recounted a harrowing incident in which Brian entered her home armed and threatened her, a chilling account that highlighted his instability. Attorney Barry Hazen testified about Brian's increasingly erratic behavior and dangerous tendencies, while psychiatrist Mark Cunningham presented a revealing college essay written by Brian outlining his beliefs about racial persecution and violence, further underscoring the defense's argument. After 12 hours of deliberation, the verdict was in. Brian was found guilty on all 54 counts. On December 13, 2008, Judge Bodiford handed down the maximum sentence, multiple life terms with no chance of parole. Bass Webb. In court, Bass Webb, known for his violent past, was confronted with attempted murder charges. CCTV footage captured Webb, a former inmate with a record of assault, intentionally crashing his car into 2 prison workers. While one narrowly escaped, the other was tragically injured. As Webb stood before Judge Vanessa Dixon, his audacity peaked. What happened next stunned the entire courtroom. Webb spat directly at Judge Dixon, catching her completely off guard. Despite initially dismissing him, Judge Dixon swiftly brought Webb back, pressed charges against him, and promptly ejected him from the courtroom. Yet, this was only the beginning of Webb's defiance. Incarcerated and awaiting trial, he incited a riot among fellow inmates at the Fayette County Detention Center. Chaos erupted as beanbag bullets and pepper balls were deployed to subdue the unrest. Enraged, Webb retaliated by attacking a corrections officer with a metal telephone box. This earned him additional charges and a 15-year sentence. However, the most unsettling development emerged when new evidence linked Webb to the previously unsolved murder of his ex-girlfriend, Bria Rowitz. With a disturbing sense of pride, Webb confessed to the crime, bragging about evading the death penalty. As a result, his sentence was extended to 50 years in prison. 5 years later, another cold case came back to haunt Webb. He was charged with the murder of yet another ex-girlfriend, Sabrina Vaughn. This time, Webb's sinister intentions were etched on his skin, a tattooed hit list of targets, including judges, prosecutors, law enforcement, and even the media. His conviction earned him a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Daniel Stewart. In Mississippi, the narrative surrounding Daniel Stewart, a 21-year-old business major student, shifted dramatically when he was accused of committing a bold robbery. Reports detailed how he vaulted over the counter of a local store, swiftly subdued a female clerk in a headlock, and seized $20 from the cash register in a daring act of strong-armed robbery. Arrested soon after, the situation escalated when Daniel appeared in court and had an outburst, using explicit language and physically lashing out at a sheriff's deputy. He headbutted the deputy, causing a severe injury, including a broken nose. Security personnel promptly intervened and restrained Daniel, taking him into custody. Law enforcement officials, grappling with the aftermath of Daniel's erratic behavior, revealed troubling details about his condition. As authorities struggled to make sense of the situation, the sheriff addressed the incident, that Daniel was under the influence of drugs during his arrest and had assaulted a jail worker the previous night. With concerns mounting for Daniel's well-being and the safety of those around him, authorities emphasized the urgent need for a thorough medical evaluation. The sheriff voiced concerns regarding the substance Daniel had ingested and its potential effects, underscoring the necessity of a thorough medical evaluation to safeguard everyone involved, including medical personnel, Daniel himself, and law enforcement officials. As events progressed, Daniel confronted not just the initial robbery accusation, but also a significant charge of assaulting a law enforcement officer. With a bond set at $200,000, Daniel faced an uncertain future as the consequences of his actions rippled through both the community and the judicial system. Sidney Newsom. Surveillance footage captured the startling moment when 27-year-old Sidney Newsom attacked Judge Aubrey Rimes inside Pike County Justice Court. Sidney found himself facing a domestic violence charge at Pike County Justice Court in Mississippi, where he stood before Southern District Judge Aubrey Rimes. Initially calm, Sidney's mood quickly soured during an altercation with a court officer. When asked to sign papers, Sidney, unprepared and agitated, engaged in a heated argument with Judge Rimes, prompting the officer to escort him out. As he was being led away, Sidney's frustration boiled over. He grabbed a stack of papers and flung them at Judge Rimes, followed by throwing a telephone. Judge Rimes took action, managing to restrain Sidney on a table until backup arrived. Sidney's disruptive behavior resulted in him facing additional charges for contempt of court and a brief 48 hours in prison. Daniel Schlienz. Friday, December 16, 2011, began like any other at the Cook County Courthouse. A day filled with the familiar sounds of gavels striking and papers shuffling. But in the blink of an eye, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the deafening crackle of gunfire. Daniel Schlienz, a man with a history of violent outbursts, had just been convicted of third-degree criminal sexual conduct. As he stood before Judge Robert Tiffany, his anger and frustration boiled over. With a sudden movement, he pulled out a handgun and began firing wildly, sending panic through the crowded courtroom. Prosecutor Timothy Scannell and a bystander, Gregory Mitchell, fell victim to Schlienz's gunshots, both suffering serious injuries. Chaos erupted as people scrambled for cover, screaming and crying in terror. Court officers and police rushed to subdue Schlienz, eventually pinning him to the ground. The courthouse was plunged into chaos, with lawyers, judges, and staff fleeing for their lives. The sound of sirens filled the air as police and ambulances hastened to the scene, eventually apprehending Schlienz and restoring order. Schlienz was subsequently charged with 2 felony counts of premeditated first-degree attempted murder and held on $2 million bail. Investigators found that Schlienz intended to retaliate against his prosecutor, Scannell, if convicted. He had no escape plan and considered either suicide or provoking a police officer to shoot him. Schlienz's father, Gary, and prosecutor Scannell were unavailable for comment, while Thompson's family and Cook County Sheriff Mark Falk declined interviews. While in jail, Schlienz exhibited symptoms of medical distress, prompting jail staff to call 911. He was subsequently transported to the hospital from the St. Louis County Jail later that evening. According to Colleen Kennedy, an investigator at the St. Louis County Medical Examiner's Office in Duluth, Schlienz passed away at the hospital the following morning, surrounded by his family. An autopsy performed was unable to determine the exact cause of his death. Schlienz's sudden death has raised concerns about the lack of closure for the victims and the community. His attorney, John Lilly, who helped save Scannell's life during the shooting, doubts that Schlienz's death brings closure to the victims. Joseph Zieler. In May 1990, the community of Cape Coral, Florida, was shattered when 11-year-old Robin Cornell and her babysitter, Lisa Story, were brutally assaulted and murdered in their own home. The horrifying discovery was made by Robin's mother, Jan Cornell, whose frantic 911 call echoed the urgency of the tragedy. Despite exhaustive efforts, the case went cold for more than 2 decades until Joseph Zieler's arrest in 2016, initially for shooting and injuring his son. It was during this arrest that Zieler's DNA was collected and entered into the database, ultimately matching DNA evidence recovered from the crime scene back in 1990. Zieler's encounter with the law for a separate offense provided detectives with the crucial opportunity to obtain his fingerprints and DNA samples. These were promptly included in the CODIS database, which also housed unidentified DNA from the Cornell Story case. When the system ran, detectives received a hit linking Zieler to the 26-year-old murder case. Subsequently, Zieler was arrested again and charged with capital murder. During the court proceedings, the prosecutor contended that the defendant's actions were of such gravity and seriousness that they warranted the ultimate recommendation of death. Initially, Zieler professed ignorance regarding the victims and Jan Cornell, posing rhetorical questions about knowing Lisa's story and Robin Cornell. However, he later contradicted himself, alleging that his DNA was found at the crime scene because he had engaged in intimate acts with Jan the night before the murders. He further claimed that the victims had failed to wash their sheets, implying a casual and dismissive attitude towards his involvement. Zieler further disparaged the victim's mother, referring to her as a pig and suggesting that her supposed lack of hygiene would have preserved his DNA at the crime scene for months. In a last-ditch effort, Zieler claimed the prosecutor was framing him, questioning the DNA evidence and highlighting the retesting of the sample. He asked the jury if they had heard the DNA witnesses testify to retesting the sample, taking a new swab from the sheet, and having another analyst conduct the same test. Zieler emphasized that the retesting had indeed been done. Despite his efforts, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, finding Zieler guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story. The jury's decision was clear and direct, leaving no room for doubt. However, it was Zieler's behavior during his sentencing that left the courtroom in shock. Handcuffed and flanked by detectives, he requested a private discussion with his attorney. As the attorney leaned in, Zieler suddenly threw a wild elbow, catching everyone off guard. Thankfully, the detectives quickly subdued him, restoring order to the courtroom. Zieler claimed to be relaxed despite his outburst, while his lawyer joked about having taken harder hits in his boxing days. The tension was palpable as the court prepared to deliver its verdict. After reviewing other capital cases, the court concluded that the death penalty was a proportionate sentence for Zieler's heinous crimes. The court ruled that Zieler had forfeited his right to live under Florida state law. Zieler was sentenced to death for the murders of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story. His premeditated attack on his defense raised questions about its similarity to other cases such as that of Christopher Teal. In a King County courtroom in Seattle, Washington, Christopher Teal, a homeless man, faced serious charges of sexual assault. The incident unfolded when Teal followed a woman into a restroom at a Volkswagen dealership and attacked her. Quick intervention by dealership employees led to his arrest on charges of first-degree sexual assault and unlawful imprisonment. Represented by his lawyer, Reed Birkland, Teal appeared in court for a competency hearing. At the start, Teal appeared amused and made a sudden gesture towards Birkland, prompting a swift response from a court officer. Despite the initial calm, Teal unexpectedly lashed out, striking his own lawyer before being subdued by police. During his subsequent court appearances, measures were taken to prevent further incidents, including restraining Teal heavily. Despite these precautions, Teal voiced a peculiar concern about his appearance in the mugshot, questioning where authorities had obtained a photo of him with short hair, claiming he didn't have a Facebook account. The legal proceedings continued with another scheduled hearing, eventually culminating in Teal being sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. While some attributed Teal's behavior to possible mental health issues, his erratic actions in court underscored the complexities of his case. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.